All right, so hi everyone. We are going to talk about University of Louisville and this project that we did to consolidate all of these different websites on all of these different platforms into like one platform with one code base. So I'm calling this flexibility versus consistency. That's going to be the theme of this, and I'm just going to jump right in because I have more slides than time at this point. So hi, my name is April Duangjumpa. That's me. I'm a technical architect at Mighty Citizen. So been working with Drupal for about 12 years in kind of this agency world. I like it because it lets me work on these big, complex projects. And I get to do that at a place called Mighty Citizen. So we are the improvement agency. And what that means is we work with mission-driven organizations to help increase their impact, and we do that with branding, marketing, digital services. So they've been around for about 25 years now. Mostly work with associations, nonprofits, government, and then, as you'll see, education. So we are going to talk about U of L, like background to this project. We'll get into governance. We'll do kind of walk through our process, design, Drupal, content, and all the different considerations we made along the way, and then we will talk about results. So U of L is a pretty big university. Last year they had 24,000 students, 170,000 alumni, 12 different schools and colleges, and then a bunch of offices, departments, centers, research institutes, all supporting those colleges. And then before we came in, they had over 375 websites. So it's a lot of fun to work with. And if anyone here works in higher ed, you know that a lot of higher ed challenges come to just recruitment and retention. So fewer students are considering it as an option. So they wanted to focus on getting more people in and making sure that their current students and staff are supported. So making sure they stick around, have a great experience. And one way they do that is through branding, digital experience. But when we started this project, like I said, we had 375 plus websites. They just kind of grew over the past 20 years. So, you can imagine that technical debt, really just spitting out dated content. It felt like very disjointed. You would be on one link and suddenly be on a different site that was last updated in 2008. And it was accessibility was not as much of a consideration back then, so a lot of these sites were not accessible. So our partnership started around the same time as their new president. They saw that need for centralization and having a good digital experience. So part of that included that digital landscape overhaul, and that's where we came in. So we always start with a discovery process, and during that, we sought to understand how our audience is interacting with the website. So different audiences, prospective students, current students, parents, staff. We sought to understand every touch point in that journey. So all the way from just learning about the university, knowing it exists, to becoming an alumni, donating money, maybe sending your kids there. And we also wanted to understand how departments were working together. So what are the challenges, pain points, and how we could streamline that. So from all that research, which I'm going to completely skip over, even though it's a lot of hard work, we came up with some project goals for the web rebuild. So first of all, we wanted to build a framework for content governance. Then we wanted to consolidate all of those websites. Our target was less than 100. And then we still wanted each department to be able to maintain that unique web presence and maintain their own content, but still maintaining the university brand above that. So it was a lot of words, but I just wanted to kind of recap and reflect for a moment. We wrangled almost 400 websites. The team had different levels of experience and tech savviness and lots of different systems, and they all had to kind of manage their own identity within the university. And we wanted to do that with one code base. So it was a lot of work. This work is still ongoing. They're still releasing sites, but lots of cross-departmental collaboration, lots of research, And we had a really great team to work with. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. Sorry, I just lost my thing. All right, so we have 3 different types of sites shown here. So all the way to your left is your main site. That's going to be your flagship site. It's usually the starting point. So everyone who lands here needs to be able to find what they need. That middle one is a college site. So this is a college of education. This is going to be more informative, tell you what programs they have, what the admissions process is like, and maybe try to convince you why you should go here. And then financial aid, you've probably already invested in the university at some point, so you just need information, how to pay my tuition or how to get financial aid. So you can see the visual identity here is all similar, but they all have different components that serve these different needs. So this more like factual information delivering versus your more like storytelling components. So the question here is, how do you create that centralized framework to serve all these different needs? So I'm going to get into governance really quickly. When we talk about governance, we usually think about content governance, but content isn't the whole product. So we've also got brand and tech. So here we are defining governance as the set of rules, processes, and products that define how an organization manages that product. So we're including design, we're including code, and we're including content in that. And then here's just showing a spectrum because, at some point we will fall somewhere on the spectrum. And so we need this because without governance, things tend to kind of like veer towards that decentralized end of it, which isn't always bad, just depending on kind of what your team is and what they need. But when we don't have that, design starts to kind of see that brand go wild. So if there's any designers here and you like see this brand that you work so hard to build, but then there are people who are just completely doing something else, like it doesn't feel great. Developers, I mean, how many people here have inherited this giant legacy code base that is all over the place and you're spending all this time fixing bugs, not doing fun work, just doing like bug hunting work? And then content, I feel like can go one of 2 ways. Like if your system's too centralized, it's too limiting and they just need to get stuff done. So they'll just go like spin up a WordPress site or, something else, just kind of fragmenting that brand even further. Or if it's too flexible, they start to create things that don't feel aligned with that brand. So that's making our designers sad now. So for each of these, we want to kind of figure out where we fall in that spectrum. And some questions that I ask to kind of figure that out is if there's one team managing that product, you are going to be more centralized. If there's multiple teams, that's kind of where you veer towards decentralization. Variations, how do we accommodate variations on the product? Are there any processes for product updates? Who's financing the product? Like that's important because you want to make sure that you can continue to work on this. And how do you handle one-offs? Everyone has a one-off situation that they want. And part of that involves compromise. So all these different requirements that we had for U of L, we distilled into one core feature set, so making things as generic as possible to serve the broadest set. Things where we had that conflicting priorities, like the more informational site versus campaign site, we tried to build in as much as we can to serve all these different needs. Individual customizations, like I said, every site needs to be able to kind of personalize their own content. So we used install profiles, site settings, letting you kind of go manage that on your own, but still not making any changes to that code base. And then evolving needs, teams change, needs change. So we always want to revisit where we fall on this governance spectrum because what worked before might not work anymore. So this is kind of where we landed for our teams. For the U of L team, they had a really small creative and technical team, but they were really good at what they did. So we let them own that design and we let them own that code. But then for the actual people creating content, they were more distributed across departments, so we allowed for more flexibility there. And so the more you centralize things, the more work you're putting on a single team. So we try to kind of balance out, looking for ways to balance out our different teams. So we're going to just jump right into front end. For this project, we did a separate front end, which I think is kind of more standard now. So we just go from our design, which we had in Figma, front end in like a UI front end. So we did that in Storybook and then hooked that up into Drupal. So that helped us with kind of our single source of truth. We could reuse that markup in another CMS if we wanted to, but for this project, Drupal was going to be that main consumer of the front end. And then here's just a super high-level overview of how we get to visual design, because I feel bad for leaving out the rest of the team. We're just talking about development here, sitemap, wireframe, visual design. But again, we're going to skip all that because we will be here forever. So here's just a couple of pieces from our design system, probably not much different from what we all work with today, but just showing how we manage our brand. So this includes style guide, components, some guidelines, a couple of variations. Again, not the full thing, just bits and pieces. And then we translate that into code with just HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So this isn't hooked up to anything yet, but again, lets us reuse that markup so we know all buttons are coming from that same button component and so on. I will note that this project was pre-SDC, so single directory components, but if you are familiar with that, basically the same concepts. If I were to do this today, I'd probably look at SDC. So either like including that in here or just doing that on its own. And then just showing how we build this up into more usable pieces. So now we're starting to look like a website, like things that people interact with. This is the part that we integrate into the CMS. And again, consistent visual language here, but still some variations. So if you look at that CTA panel, which is kind of buried, but you'll see there's like a red variation, a neutral variation, and then a dark one. And I'm just that's how we integrate that into Drupal. So instead of letting people kind of go in and pick specific color combinations, we just define here, do you want a red theme, neutral theme, or black theme? Because if we let them pick out, like, what button color do you want, that gets wild. So they don't have to think about it. The component data is still all the same. And if they change their mind, it's just one field here. And we've already tested this out for accessibility. We've tested it out to see like what looks good. So again, just simplifying that design piece for content. So this is a basic component. This kind of brings up more variation. So these are all our hero components. Again, different heroes serving different purposes. You can see a lot of the same visual language with our buttons and fonts. But we've got some more storytelling, some kind of more lead capture. And seeing that in action. So here's more of your everything put together as pages. This left one here is our College of Engineering. So again, more discovery, more learning about the college and their programs. And then the program page to the right is more information-based. Here's what you need to complete the program. Here's how you sign up for it or to get more information about it. So the guardrails here become who can use what and where. So all of this does live in one component library. That Storybook is just all in one thing. But the permissions part of it, we're going to implement at the CMS level. So getting into Drupal. Well, it is a multi-site, and I'll show you what that looks like. And we do share content, and I'll get into how individual sites can customize their content. A couple modules that I'll talk about here, which are pretty standard, I think, but config split, this is the main driver of how we turn on different features. Config read only, we lock down all of our config. We don't want people going in and creating custom content types yet. That just gets wild. And then we have config ignore for the config that they should be able to edit. lets them create web forms, blocks, edit their site title, site settings without changing that code base. And then config pages is just one of those things that we create admin pages so that they can manage different settings. And then content sharing, JSON API, I'll talk about how we use that. And then entity share, I put a little trophy here because that drives a lot of our content sharing, and I'll talk about how we use that, but lets us share content between different entities. So here's what our multi-site architecture looks like. So this is all on a single platform. We use Acquia Site Factory to manage that. That helps with kind of managing all those deploys so everything gets updated at the same time. But each site is still its own database. So separate databases, different files, content, users, but still pointing to that same code base. So whenever we make updates to that code base, we're going to push all of those to all of our sites. And whether or not the code is actually active on that site is going to be determined by whatever site setting, and that's where config split is used. So same thing, but just I'm showing you different site types. So back in that discovery process from earlier, we started listing out what sites should have what features, and we kind of broke it all out into chunks. So starting from the bottom here, we have our core feature set. Every single site is going to have whatever is included here. And then our colleges needed a couple college-specific features, so we lumped these all into a college profile. And then we had a couple of unique sites, which are just one-offs, which is like a developer's favorite words. No other sites are going to have some of these features, but they still all share that core. So just expanding this a little bit further, this kind of shows you what types of sites are included in each. So again, 80% of our sites are going to use that core set. There were 12 colleges and schools, so 12 of them are using that college site. And then 4 unique sites. And again, keeping that number low is really important because the more unique sites you have, the harder it's going to be to maintain. Config split, there's a new version out, and it is a lot easier. It's kind of more patch-based instead of like creating complete configs. But again, still keeping that low. So early on, we decided that if we were building something for a specific site, so we had a couple admissions-specific components, we realized that most other sites were going to benefit from that anyway. So we generalized as much as we could for that default config. But again, main site, intranet, and events is a pretty big deal. So here's kind of how we use config split to do this. So imagine that this is your entire code base here to your right. In reality, this is like very small, but just a visual. So the things here that are on are going to be that default config where every single site has these turned on, and all other profiles that we'll go through are just going to add on to that. So next one is our college sites. So we set a variable that said if this is a college site, turn on this configuration. The only college-specific features, I think, are the homepage and hero, so just helping distinguish our colleges from all of the other sites. And then the main site, couple of theme overrides. That's also where the programs and directory content lives. So we wanted to centralize that so that the programs content and the directory only lives there and that people aren't able to create their own programs and custom directories. And then I'm going to call this one out because this is the global content site. So I'll talk about content sharing, content reuse, lots of different ways to do that. But the way we did it is to just make this another site. And it has everything turned on because it needs to be able to deliver content to the other sites. So this is kind of our hub for all of our main global navigation, some global content. Updates here will propagate to other sites. And I mentioned entity share, so that's what we'll use to do that. So that's the entity share logo, which I love. So yeah, all of these individual sites still have to keep that university brand. So disclaimers, taxonomies, navigation. Because the code and content on all of these sites were identical, it made it really easy to just use this module to share that content. And yeah, originally we were going to do migrations, but with migrations, there's so much nested content and like issues with reference entities. This actually handles it all for you. It'll pull all of those down too. So again, this saved us a ton of money in doing this project. So yeah, we defined global content as the source site, which this module is enabled on all of the sites, and we'll pull down content from that site. And I'm just going to focus on the first part of this, like how we maintain that overall brand. This should be pretty straightforward. So we had only a couple of teams managing content in that global content site. So they were going in creating those like about U of L components. We had a couple of page templates, the global menus. So this here is just that shared content. And we had, I think, cron and a hook on update that would just update these on all of the other sites automatically. So just keeping all that consistent. And then just take that one step further. There's a lot here, but I'm going to walk through it. So I mentioned programs and events content that we only wanted to live on either the main site or the event site, but we wanted each site to be able to like show a list of programs. So like the arts and science site can show a list of their programs. And in order to do that, we needed the taxonomies to be able to reference to them. So starting from that kind of external endpoint that's in that darker black, we used migrate or feeds to bring that content into the site. And then the Content Hub would pull in just that taxonomy data from that site. Then the individual sites would get those terms. And now each site can kind of go in and create a list of what they wanted to reference. And then we'd have a custom module for each of these sites that would reference back that original site, look for those terms, and then show that list. So I don't know if you could see this, but this is just like what that admin looks like for each of those sites. Really just showing, they're not managing the content themselves, but they are managing what types of things they want to show, so they can pick a program from a college or a certain academic level or a delivery method or a combination. And same with events, you can pick audience, topics, and department. And then we use JSON API to kind of point to that main site or the event site and then return those nodes. And then when you see this grid on the front end, it'll actually take you to that main or event site. And then one more on content sharing. So with entity share, we're only pulling content to sites. We're not pushing to that source site, but we still wanted sites to be able to share news articles with one another because we had a lot of people going and creating, managing different but same news items. So we created a custom module. Whenever one of these sites publishes a news article, a copy gets pushed to global content and it references the original node. So any updates to that will also update at global content. And technically you could use entity share to kind of have each site bring down like news articles that they want to show. But there's so many different like types of news articles with all these different types of schools that we wanted a more custom experience. So we built a dashboard that lets you kind of ping the news articles on global content, search by topic, category, site, keyword, and then just select what you want and then display that on your site. So not driven by entity share, but just shows you another way to distribute content. All right, so for the other half of this, how do we let individual sites manage their own content? And here's where those config modules come into play. So like I said, we lock down most of our config, keep that consistent, but let people manage their own site settings. So example here, we identified a couple of different menu patterns that different sites would want to use just based on the type of site that they were. So like this CTA component that we mentioned earlier, these were predefined, pre-developed, and as a site owner, you would just go in and pick which pattern you wanted to display. All of the menus are the same, referencing the same menus, just different theming. So here's what that config page looks like. There's options for a custom logo. Otherwise, you're defaulting to the U of L logo. You can kind of change the visual display of your site title, and you can choose your menu pattern. So it's a little blurry, but there's this description here that explains which menu pattern should be used and what it includes. That way, the editors know what, like beforehand, which one to use for their site. And that gets us into content authoring. So we'll talk about how we manage users, media, and then a couple of things we did for editor experience. So more modules. Top two are not modules, but they were important to this project. SSO, we had centralized users, so we used SSO to manage all that. And digital asset management. We also centralized our assets, our digital assets. And then for governance, access policy was really important. That just uses relationships to control access to entities, so who can view, edit, create, delete. And then workflow, which I think is pretty standard for these projects these days. Page templates was important to create starting points for editors. And then this is a paragraphs-driven site mostly, so we use paragraphs editor enhancements, which this is the first project I've heard about this module, and I'm surprised because it's a super low lift, but huge improvement to kind of that current paragraphs experience. So happy to find that one. So yeah, again, getting into users first, because it is a university, all of their users were centralized within the IT department. We called that the directory. So that contained all of the user info, including what sites they could manage and at what level. So when a user logs into any of these sites, it'll check that directory for those permissions. If they had permissions, they'd assign their role based on that. And that lets people be a content lead on one site and maybe just a contributor on another site. And if they ever left or changed roles at that organization, you would still just manage that in that one directory. And then once they're logged into that site, you can actually still lock that down even further. So we built this for our bigger sites like arts and sciences or intranet. Those have a lot of subsections and departments. You might not want, history content creators editing chemistry pages, even though they're all on the same site. So we used access policy to control that. Basically, we just use tags to control access, which again, this is really small, but just a couple, at the bottom of each, we have a tags term. So every site starts out with an empty taxonomy that we call content spaces. Every site will manage this on their own at the admin level. And some of them are nested, some of them aren't. But again, the tags are going to exist on both the user and the page. If the user has a tag assigned to them, they can only edit pages that also have that tag. So not all sites ended up using this because a lot of our sites were smaller or the entire team just was able to manage it all. But we just gave them that option. So if they didn't need it, they just left it empty. So again, with just generalizing that feature set into something that works for the core set. And then just a quick note on the brand center, that's what they called their DAM. They had an entirely different governance process. I don't know anything about it. I just did the integration for it, and I just installed a module, so that's all. But basically, they didn't want people going in and editing images without going through this governance process, because there were a lot of people, have you ever seen people creating full layout images, like content in columns that doesn't scale or respond? We had a lot of that. And we had a lot of just text in images. So we didn't really want that anymore. And we wanted to make sure all the imagery just fit the brand. So again, that DAM module keeps all of this, this is what you could use. And it was consistent across sites. You could just go pick what you wanted. And then this is pretty standard for Drupal, but I'm going to just call it out because this is why we use Drupal. It's just structured content. I love structured content. But again, removing design decisions from content editors, this is just a news article with different view modes, and the story is going to appear consistent wherever it's used. So yeah, Drupal. Again, we also do this with components. So here's that same CTA paragraph, just the full thing. Again, easy content entry, consistent output, like that heading is always going to be consistent. So good for your brand, good for accessibility. And then here is the component screen. So this is coming from that paragraphs editor enhancements module that I mentioned. So on top of normal paragraphs module, you get this like modal view. There's a search in the left. Categories and icons are new. So in our case, we made the icons a screenshot of what that component would look like before you commit to actually building content for it. And then the descriptions here tell you when to use that component. So like between the categories and the descriptions, I'm pointing like on here, but you can't see, but to the left, the categories and the descriptions here. We took that straight from our content training guides so that editors who have already been trained kind of see that same language again, just reinforcing that training. And then page templates, that's that module that we had used. These are just pre-created nodes that are cloned and used as starting points for editors. So I had mentioned this in the context of the global content site because this base set here is centrally managed. And as the site is spun up, it comes with these templates kind of already there to start creating with. And then individual sites can also use their own templates. So like our arts and sciences site, you'll see all their different departments have kind of that same content structure. So we've just got a list view here on the left, and then you can actually, that's a live template preview, so you can even see like the Drupal admin bar. And then, so just another page template. So this is for a non-academic site homepage. It's pretty clear from the title. That's when you should use it. So this has more of those like marketing focus, more CTA type templates. Each field, which I think you can kind of see, has instructions on what types of content to put there. So, this says use this space to introduce your department, provide featured content. And what to include in that space. So again, helping to reinforce that content training and keeping that brand voice, making it easier to stick to that brand. These aren't strict templates, so they're not things that you clone and you're stuck with that structure. You clone this and then it's just another node that you can edit. But at least we have this good starting point to work with because that's always a pain point for editors, is just having to start from scratch each time. All right, so let me talk through what we're seeing. So by centralizing our code base and architecture, code deploys are a lot faster. I think Site Factory really helps manage that. And it's easier to communicate around updates because I can just send an update saying, here's what we pushed to this core set, here's what we pushed to this college set, and here's what we did for the main site, and so on. Having that governance plan in place, that content training that we keep reinforcing, that's really helped that teams work together more and help break down those silos. And then that brand and design system, that's going to help build that trust and authority in the university, keep that brand and voice consistent, and building in that flexibility and intuitive editing experience results in happier teams. So I've heard a couple people say they were actually having a lot of fun building components. People don't say Drupal's fun all the time. So like when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, yes, it's a win. And then, yeah, just a couple of things that have launched that we've seen. So we've got college homepages, arts and sciences, education and human development, a lot of the same visual language, but again, making it their own. Here's some academic programs. So art and design on one end, School of Nursing on the other end, showing the difference in, two very different programs, still able to kind of create what they need for the nursing students or for an arts and sciences student. And then this one's my favorite. This is the dental care website. So this is not like any of the other sites because this is they're offering this to the public. This is if you want your teeth cleaned. And I love this because like this is so far out there compared to what we've seen so far. Like this is public facing, public services. It's about teeth. I don't know. Like I love that. So everything that we've built for the university still works in this like very kind of different context. So just seeing them be able to like create things that work for them, like kind of helps me reinforce like, okay, we're kind of doing something right here. And that was my last example. I just realized I just like ended it on dental care. So yeah, some things that we've learned throughout the process. A lot of the time agencies take like projects. We switched it up and took a product mindset here, and that really helped us consider like long term, what are the rest of these sites going to look like, and kind of make things flexible and let us continuously improve. But yeah, we still had to compromise. So serving that broadest set of needs without compromising the core product. Thinking about the dental care site versus thinking about the main site, what do those have in common? And then enabling your team to do their best work. That's probably been the most important thing for me. So having things like structured content, having things like a component library, that's going to save dev and content time because they're not making design decisions on the fly. So they're just focused on doing their best dev work or doing their best content work. And then communication, breaking down those silos, making sure we keep training, keep updating the team, getting feedback. We got a lot of feedback on components that weren't working for some use cases, and so we would refactor and kind of see what works for everyone. So that goes a long way in building that best product. And that's all I have. So slides are here. There's a couple links throughout the thing in case anyone needs to reference those. And then this is just taking us back to Mighty Citizen. You can learn about the work that we've done and some more U of L fun stuff. And actually, we have 5 minutes left. So anyone have any questions?
I have that subdomain.
We had a mix of both, actually. So we had some path-based domains. We had some subdomains, but mostly either or. Oh, sorry. Question was, are the different sites subdomains? So yes, we tried to do more subdomains because there were some things with path-based that I cannot explain, but it was complicated. So yeah, we did have a mix. Yep.
Can you speak to your config split setup as to how you're kind of balancing maybe like environments and feature? I think that's how maybe how you're doing it. Like, so you have all these sites, but you also probably are like dev test environments stuff with different things. So.
Yeah, so we had a local, and I think we had a production. And then we just tried not to do too many different feature splits, although I can kind of see it going that way maybe. But yeah, so default, colleges, and then local and production. And then we did have a couple of one-offs, like intranet was not publicly accessible, so we updated that permission. Yeah, most of them were either site-based or feature-based.
What was your role in this thing? You know this really well. So.
Yeah, so I was hired for this project, and it kind of became like all I did for a year. The role was technical architect, so I was managing the development and just making sure that it was productized and strategic and set up for long term. But then ultimately, it was like a fancy web developer. It's a little bit of everything.
When you say productized, what does that mean? Like you created the website with it, you like taking it back to the university and letting other groups use this? I mean, this is the whole university. What do you mean by product?
So I think when I say that, I mean like considering the long term and all of the different types of sites, like different stakeholders. Most of what I did was kind of communication, because a project like this, there's so many different teams involved that they really need to understand like what what are they getting? So just making sure that all of their needs are served. So working a lot with our UX research, design, making sure that whatever we build is going to be sustainable, because they're going to manage this, hopefully for years. And yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
I mean, this is really well architected. This is really well architected. So is this open source? Is the repo open source? Could people benefit?
Not the University of Louisville. We are working on something similar for us that might be open source. So if you follow Mighty Citizen, that might be something we start to communicate about a little bit more.
Mighty Citizen is what? It's an agency?
Yep.
So the agency was hired by the university to build this.
Yes. And ultimately so our partnership with them is actually over. So ultimately they are taking over this product, kind of all the training that we gave them, like incorporating that into their own processes too.
So Mighty Citizen will have a distro of some kind that, or this whole architecture that we could take to other universities or other organizations that want something like this.
It is something we're working on, yeah.
Yeah, this is great.
Well, thank you.
Very well architected.
Yeah.
Did you collaborate with the developers at the university, and how did you hand off certain tests?
Yeah. This has been like the most collaborative project that I've been on in terms of our internal team and then with them. So we were, the role as technical architect, more meetings than coding. There you go. We were communicating, training, doing all of that. Basically, I had an ongoing like feature Friday, and every week we would sit down with the project team, talk about what features we released, and then what questions do you have, and how is this architected, and how to maintain it. So yeah, lots of training, lots of documentation. Yeah.
In preparation for the
sorry.
handoff, did they do any of the hands-on work, or you all did it all knowing you're going to hand it?
Yeah, it was part of our training was we're actually going to go through and we're going to integrate front end and do all of this. So it was very collaborative.
Yeah.
Yep.
Did you find the university staff appropriately? Or did you have to make optimal skills ways to train?
Yeah, there was definitely, I think there's a lot of things here that might not be standard Drupal, especially when we started. I think the storybook piece was new, and we had a lot more programmer, back-end types, whereas storybook is very front-end focused. So I think we did have to kind of pivot there, but because they were a smaller staff that had to support everything, we made our training as flexible as possible. So like sat down with them, kind of understood what gaps there were in training and tried to tailor to that. Yeah.
I think you mentioned that you started with like 375 sites.
Yep.
Did you reduce that number like in the development? And then my other question is like, how much analysis maybe went into like how you're going to architect this in the beginning with that many sites? Did you like consider? I mean, do you even like fathom the idea of maybe like the domain module, or maybe like some of these sites maybe use groups or something like that, sharing the same database to kind of reduce the architectural needs?
We had considered both of those. I don't know. We had a lot of problems with groups in the past. Like it can be a little too much for, I think, what we needed here. So first question was, sorry, I forgot to repeat the questions again. Yeah, like how did we consolidate that? That would be more of our research, like our content strategy. They were the ones who really kind of dug through and made recommendations on what those sites are, just based on what are best practices in higher ed now. And then the second one was things like domain or groups. We had already had a contract with Site Factory to manage all these, so that like different database structure, like that seemed to be best for that. Yeah.
Did you start with Site Factory, or did you build something? put something that was already that you were creating in the Site Factory?
So I think we had Site Factory from the start, but I think I started with just a single site, and that's that core site. So I just spun up a site and worked on it on a server. And then when we needed to give people access, that's when we actually started building those profiles. So yeah, you could take this and just spin it up on your own, because we did have that mono repo, storybook and everything was just all in one place. Yeah.
Is Storybook holding your component definition code and Drupal is downstream fetching that code, or was it just a copy to demonstrate the components?
So the component definition would have lived in Storybook, I believe. And then we would just reference that story. We use the components module, which does that namespacing. We just reference Storybook directly for that. Which again, if I were to redo this, I would probably SDC it a little bit more. Anyone else?
How many people were on this project and how long did it take?
So the project started. So how many people were on it, and how long did it
From
take?
your end,
Yeah.
from the university?
I would say that everyone at Mighty Citizen, which we're a team of 50 or so it's not huge, but not small. I think everyone had touched it at some point. Maybe 25 or so people. Lots of project management. So our project managers were completely dedicated to this and ran a lot of that. And then lots of UX research. Maybe 2 or 3 people that were one person full-time, then a couple people half-time. And then I was the full-time developer, but I think we had a team of maybe 5 developers at some point.
And how long did it?
I would say maybe 2 years, which originally we wanted this to be a longer term thing. We wanted to start with maybe dedicate a year to that discovery and then have a 5-year kind of rollout. And they are still rolling these out. So this is ongoing still. So we just kind of created this feature set and then let them manage that on their own. 10.
All right, I want to make sure that we have that everyone has time for the little break, but I'm sure you can probably come up or catch April if you have more questions. It's
Awesome.
April.
Cool. Thank you.